Hi everyone, it's Dave and Olive. Thanks for joining us here at Book Blather. So today we wanted to do a yearly wrap-up. We know it's getting kind of late, but we kind of wanted to discuss all the books that we've read and the adventures we've had in 2021. This was our first full year on BookTube, and we've read a lot of books for us. We've met a lot of friends, both viewers and fellow booktubers, and we've had a lot of fun along the way. Now this year we read 45 books. We're pretty slow readers. Part of the problem with that is, you know, Olive and I have to share all the books, so that does really tend to slow things down. You can read it when I'm done. But we read 45 books, which we've never read even close to that in a year before. I know some of our fellow booktubers, they've read 2, 3, even 4 times as much as that in a year, but for us that's a lot. As you'll see, we try to be pretty widely read. We read mostly, you know, horror, sci-fi, fantasy, and YA, comics as well, but we also mix it up with other kinds of fiction and nonfiction as well, and you'll see some of those today. Since it was only 45 books, we're going to quickly run through them all. We're only going to spend a few seconds on each, just a sentence on each one, except for the few favorites that we had throughout the year. We'll pause for those and just spend a minute talking about those really quick. Now, we had the hard copies of most of these books, but there were a couple that were Kindle books or audio books, and there's also a couple that we liked enough that we actually gave away to other people to read, so for a few of these we'll be putting up the electronic image on the screen. So without further ado, we'll just jump right into it. In January, we read 5 books. First book we read was Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson. This is the first book in the Malazan series, which is a finished, very long 10-book epic fantasy series with a lot of other books that go along with it. The second book we read was To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. This was a sci-fi novella that was told from the perspective of an astronaut that was on a team of other astronauts that went around and investigated 4 different habitable planets. We wanted to make sure that we read some nonfiction books this year, so we started off with one in January. We decided to do a science book because Olive wanted to get her science on. You don't think that'll work? And then we divide it by the sine of x? No? Olive decided to read this one, Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson. Probably because Olive is always in a hurry. But this book was about, basically, it was Neil deGrasse Tyson, a famous scientist, and he basically tried to quickly cover a bunch of major topics in physics and cosmology. The next one we read is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This is an old classic. It's very short. It's actually really just a short story about a woman who has a deteriorating mental condition, and she is locked in a room with some yellow wallpaper and becomes obsessed with that. And the last book we read in January was Exigency by Michael Seamson. This was a science fiction book about some people that were orbiting a faraway planet, and something goes wrong and they have to land on the planet, and their encounters with 2 very different types of intelligent species that live there. Now in February we had a special kind of month. Like I said, we try to read widely, so we did something pretty different than what we normally do in February, and we decided to do a British books month. So try to get in the mood. We decided to have some tea and biscuits. Alright, I hope you like this one because they usually have the Earl Grey. You want to try some of the tea? You like that English breakfast? No? So I told you should try the Earl Grey. And we read 4 very different kinds of books that came from the UK. So we were very lucky this month, and several of our favorite books of the year we read in February. One of those was I'm an Island by Tamsin Kalidas. This is outside our usual wheelhouse, but this is a memoir by a woman that went to start a new life on a Scottish island with her young husband, and they were going to start managing a croft. And after she gets there, everything goes wrong. She finds herself isolated, destitute, not welcomed by the people that are there, and she goes through a lot of hardship, and it's a very beautifully written book. The next one we read, which was another one of our favorite books of the year, was Here is the Beehive by Sarah Crossan. This is a novel that was actually told in verse, which was really something to read, and it was about a woman who's attorney for a man that she ends up having an affair with, and he dies. And because it's a secret affair, she's not able to tell anyone else about it. And so it talks about all the hardship and the heartache that she goes through trying to deal with this on her own. And the next one, which is yet another one of our favorite books of the year. We did not have another month like this. We had 3 of our favorites in 1 month, but that one was Paradise Block by Alice Ash. Also another very different type of book. This was a collection of short stories, but all about people who live in this rundown apartment complex. And they're not only the stories all connected in space, but they're also all connected in terms of all the people that live there. A lot of interwoven connections, a lot of symbolism, a lot of sort of double symbolism, great literary devices in this book. Definitely one of our favorites of the year. And the last book we read in February is Lonnie by Max Porter. This was a piece of experimental fiction, probably you'd call it. This was about boy Lonnie, and he lives in a village where there's a spirit called Dead Papa Toothwort, I think, if I remember correctly, who ends up having a special connection with Lonnie. And this spirit listens for all the whispers that you hear everybody in the town talking, and that's sort of how it's told on a page. You'll see a bunch of different whispers, sort of like in a jumble, and give you kind of that sensory experience. Okay, so in March, we tried to continue along with the Malazan series. We tried to read the second book in the series, Dead House Gates by Stephen Erickson. We read a good part of this book, but we ended up it was the only book this year that we didn't finish. And I want to say we DNF'd it because we were very much enjoying it. We just realized that this was a series that there was a lot to this series, and we probably needed to put it down. Maybe just get a little more experience with some of these epic fantasies, and then return to it. So it was going especially slow because, you know, we were sharing the book and we were having a really hard time getting through it. But we did read a good part of it and enjoyed it. The next one we read was Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones. This is a horror novella about a group of friends that has a mannequin dummy that then ends up coming to life, and this was a good fun book. Next one we read in March was another horror novella called The Girl in the Video by Michael David Wilson. This is about a man who suddenly one day a teacher that receives an anonymous video that is somewhat alluring, but also has some details that nobody else should really know, and he feels like he can't report this, but he gets more and more videos that gradually get more and more out of hand. The next book we read was The Near Witch by Victoria Schwab, and this was about primarily a girl that lives in this village called Near, with a couple of witches that live right nearby, and one day children in the village start disappearing when a newcomer also happens to show up in the village, and so it's this mystery of trying to track down what's going on. The next book we read is The Ashbourne Boy, which is actually also by Victoria Schwab, which is actually a prequel to The Near Witch. This one tells basically the story of one of the main characters from The Near Witch before they came to the village of Near. Okay, in the month of April, we started off with Sour Candy by Keelan Patrick Burke. This was a horror novella about a man that sees a boy start screaming in the store, and only very slightly gets involved, and as soon as he does, the boy gets attached to him and basically becomes his child, and we end up with a psychological horror going on from there. Do we have Sour Candy? Yeah, right here. We have Sour Patch Kids. What? You want to try it? I don't think you would like the Sour Candy. All right. Try it. What do you think?
You like those?
The next book we read was The Tent, also by Keelan Patrick Burke. This is about, there's a path in the woods up in the mountains that you have to stay on the path in order to avoid getting into any trouble. And it mostly tells a story of this family, this husband and wife. They're having trouble in their kid, and they come across this tent, and it leads to a nice little sort of sci-fi horror tale. Next one we read is The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. This is the tale of a couple that's up in a mountain cabin and their adopted daughter, and a strange man comes up and tells the daughter that he needs to be able to talk to her parents to help save the world, and they don't want to. He ends up having some friends. They don't want to let them in, but the story ends up being about these people trying to get access and deal with what this end of the world mystery is. Okay, the next one we read is The Ledger and the Chain by Joshua D. Rothman. This is a history book that this is probably, I would not say, I hesitate to say one of our favorite books of the year, but this was probably the most impactful book that we read this year. This book details the internal domestic slave trade in the early U.S., and in particular follows 3 individual businessmen that really set up this massive domestic trade with jails and ships and transports. And it was an area that I didn't really know all that much about, and it was a very eye-opening book for me. I often think back to it a lot, and it was a very, very impactful read. So we started off May with a horror novella called The Bell Chime by Mona Kabani. This was a good book that Olive got a little bit carried away with for a couple days, running all over, ringing her bells. But this was about a woman who wakes up or sees a wanted poster of herself in her apartment complex, and ends up going on this, quest to find out what that mystery is all about. The next one we read was Heaven by Miku Kawakami. And this is a book that translated from Japanese, and it's about a boy and a girl who are both brutally bullied in school, but end up finding each other and developing some kind of friendship and exploring their very different interpretations of what they should get out of their horrific experience of being bullied. Next one we read was nonfiction, Extraterrestrial by Avi Loeb. This book was about really a part philosophy book, part science book. It was about taking the search for extraterrestrial life seriously. Avi Loeb is a well-published, well-known scientist at Harvard, and he has this discussion in the context of Oumuamua, which is an object that came into our solar system a couple years ago, and the question of whether that was actually some remnant of extraterrestrial technology, rather than an asteroid. And the last one we read in the month of May was a science fiction, We Who Are About To by Joanna Russ. And this is about a crew that ends up crashing. Something happens and they get flung far, far away in the galaxy or into another galaxy, and they crash land and kind of have to decide whether to start a new society on this planet, except for the main character, who's a little bit of a nihilist and doesn't really want to go along with that plan. Okay, in June, we again start off with a horror novella, this one called Crossroads by Laurel Hightower. We liked this one so much we gave it away to somebody else to read. But this is psychological horror about a woman who loses her son and hasn't really gotten over it, and she ends up dropping a drop of blood at his roadside grave, and ends up shortly thereafter encountering somebody that looks to be like her son, and then we're pulled down this mystery of her exploring that relationship, whatever that is. We also read another Matt Haig book this month, which really re-triggered Olive's feud with Matt Haig from last year when we read his book, The Midnight Library.
He wants a dog, he smiled. That's our current debate. I mean, I wouldn't mind a dog, but I'd want a rescue, and I wouldn't want a bloody Maltipoo or a Bichon.
But this June, we did read The Humans, And this book was about a mathematician who ends up discovering a mathematical formula that will change all the world, and some advanced aliens realize that humanity is not yet ready for it. So they send an operative that kills the mathematician right in the beginning and has to take his place to try to do cleanup. And this alien, in his time here, learns what it's like to be a human. And then the last one we read in June is Oathbreaker by A.J. Retker. This is another independently published book. This was about a knight that graduated knight school and then goes off on a quest, and it's basically like a traditional little D&D tale with a D&D adventure with a lot of little, mini quests along the way. Okay, in July, we were busy with vacation, house guests. We read just a few short, disturbing books. First one we read is a controversial one called Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by Eric LaRocca. This is set around 2000 when, social interaction online was very different, and there was a lot of chat rooms. And this is about two women that develop a relationship online and end up with having this master-slave relationship that ends up leading to some very disturbing places. The next one we read is Dead Inside by Chandler Morrison. This was another disturbing book that was about these two people, a security guard in the hospital and a doctor in the hospital. And the two of them meet, and they both have very unusual, taboo appetites, and it's about their relationship between the two of them. And the last one we read was a very short one called A Bed by Macy Williams. Hope I got that right, but if it's not, it'll be right here. And this was basically like a very short but unique post-zombie apocalypse tale from the perspective of a somewhat captive woman. Now in August, some of the friction of all the sharing of books started to get to us a little bit, so we did have a little tiff or two.
That's uncalled for. I don't do that to your book, Mark. I wait till you're done with the book.
But, we got over that relatively quickly and continued on with our reading. The first book we read was a short one called My Name is Human by Rob Shepard. This was a little horror sci-fi novella about a man that brings home an advanced AI, and, he develops a relationship with this, but it ends up not going, anywhere good. The next one we read in the month of August was Bad Ronald by Jack Vance. This was a story about a boy that his mother hides him in a room in their house, and then the mother dies, and a new family moves in. Your typical American nuclear family, and Ronald continues to live in this room and spy on the family while he's living there. The next one we read was a thriller called The Wife Between Us by Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen. This one you see from a couple different perspectives, but there's it's about this woman who's had a failed marriage with a man that appears to be a real charmer and real catch, and he is about to get remarried, and she is trying to interfere with that. And, filled with a lot of twists. And the last one we read in the month of August was maybe our favorite book of the year, science fiction novel called Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is the first book in a duology. This was a really good science fiction novel. This is about humanity many, many years in the future, after we have already, risen very high and fallen and gone through some regression, more advanced certainly than we are today, but humanity has gone through some kind of a bottleneck, and they're now leaving a dying Earth to go find one of the planets that had been attempted to be terraformed many, many generations ago. And it traverses vast expanses in space, in time, and in evolution. There's a lot of really, really cool concepts in this, and we really, really loved this book. Okay, in September we read The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum. This is a horror that's loosely based on the real-life story of Sylvia Likens, and tells the story of how a teenage girl is captured, held captive, and tortured in a basement by a bunch of neighborhood kids. The next one we read in the month of September was The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. This book was the basis for the movie Hellraiser, and this is about a man that ends up finding this puzzle box that gave him access to another dimension in pursuit of greater pleasure, but ends up finding a lot of pain, and his interactions with the woman that he's having an affair with, who's trying to save him. Okay, and the last book we read in the month of September was a book that we had reviewed as an advanced reader copy, Peel Back and See by Mike Thorne. This is a collection of horror stories, all sort of you probably call it cosmic horror, with a lot of Lovecraftian themes that end up being representative of other things. Okay, in the month of October, we did our series of short Halloween books. Olive really got in the spirit of the holiday, donning her Pat Dog costume as usual, and we read a number of good Halloween books. The first one we read was Autumn Crow by Cameron Chaney. This was a great little collection of a bunch of just Halloween type stories of different types, little sci-fi-y, little feel-good, little spooky, and it really was a good book for getting you in the Halloween mood. The next one we read was The Legend of Decimus Croom by Kevin Purdy. This was more geared for a younger audience, but this was really a Halloween version of the classic Christmas Carol tale. The next one we read was Dead Leaves by Keelan Patrick Burke. This was a collection of short stories, all that either had a Halloween basis to them or a fall basis. All had to do something, with ghosts or witches or Halloween, something like that. And the last one we read in October as part of our Halloween series was Dark Harvest by Norman Partridge. Really good book. This is about a town that is isolated, and that every year they have this competition where the October boy comes out of the corn stalks and makes a break for the center of town, and all the boys in town are supposed to try to capture him. Okay, and then November was a little bit of a slower month, but a fun one. The first one we read was Vanilla by Mona Kabani. Again, a self-published novel. This tells the story of a young girl novella that we see who spends most of her childhood in a basement and is visited by someone that she calls her daddy, that she loves and adores, and then we see her later in life when she goes out and explores a little bit of the world. When we were reviewing this book, we tried to get in the mood, and of course, Olive got a little bit carried away when we broke out the ice cream. Okay, I got the spoons. Olive! No more vanilla! But we did really enjoy reading the book and reviewing it. We had a lot of fun with this one. The next one we read in November was The Resurrectionist by Wrath James White. Another book we really liked a lot. This was the most disturbing book that we've ever read, and tells the story of a couple that encounters a man who has the ability to resurrect people after they've died with no recollection of their death. An extreme horror, but a very, very addictive thrill ride. Then in December, we kicked it off with The Roundhouse by Louise Erdrich. And this tells a story of mostly from the perspective of a boy living on an Indian reservation whose mother undergoes a brutal attack, and his father, who is a tribal judge that tries to get some justice from the law's perspective, and this coming-of-age story of the son who is frustrated with that and trying to get some justice on his own with his friends. Then the rest of the month of December, we tried to stick with a Christmas mood. The first one was a novel called The Mind of Winter by Laura Kosicki. Olive really got in the mood for this one. It was a little bit spooky. This one tells a story of a woman who wakes up on Christmas Day, and it's a blizzard, and so nobody else can get to the house, and it's just her and her teenage daughter. And she reminisces back to when she brought her daughter home from an orphanage in Siberia as an infant, and it goes back and forth between present day and reminiscing about that as her interactions with the daughter get stranger and stranger over time. And then we read some Christmas-themed graphic novels. The first one was The Last Christmas by Jerry Dugan and Brian Posen, and illustrated by Rick Remender. This one is about we're in a post-apocalyptic world, and a depressed Santa rallies to try to save Christmas. The next one was Wraith, written by Joe Hill and illustrated by Charles Paul Wilson III. This was a prequel to the popular Joe Hill novel Nosferatu, and this tells the earlier story of the villain Charlie Manx and Christmasland. And then the last one, I'm just going to hold up the first issue because we actually read this in single issue form, although you can get it in a graphic novel, of course. And this is Klaus by Grant Morrison, illustrated by Dan Mora. This was by Boom Comics. And this tells an alternate version of Santa Claus, as you can see, and it tells how he comes back to a very Dickens-style winter village where all the children are oppressed and can't play with any toys, and he basically comes to try to save the village and turn everything around. And of course, he has a certain arch nemesis, Christmas related, that's there. So this was a pretty interesting origin story for Santa Claus. So that's it. That's all the books we read in 2021. We try to do a nice assortment. We had a lot of fun reading the books and certainly enjoyed making the videos. We hope you all enjoyed watching them. And if you didn't get to see them all, we hope you enjoyed this little recap of the books that we read and the adventures we had along the way. It's been a fun year for me and Olive. Not quite what we expected our BookTube channel would be, but it's been a lot of fun. I want to thank all our friends and all the viewers, and we got a decent number of subscribers now. We thought we'd be lucky if we hit 8, so it's been a pretty exciting year for us, and so we're looking forward to 2022. If you like this video, as always, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button along with the notification bell so that you get notified the next time Olive says it's okay to upload another video. Thanks so much for watching. Take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you next time.